The morning started like any other for most people, but for a growing number of investors and currency watchers, it would become a day they would never forget. Screens flickered to life, coffee cups trembled slightly in hands gripped by anticipation, and phones buzzed with notifications at a pace that felt almost frantic. The financial forums were alive, more alive than anyone had ever seen. Screenshots of Chase and Wells Fargo accounts had begun circulating, showing numbers that were nothing short of astonishing. The Iraqi dinar, long regarded as a slow-moving and speculative currency, was reportedly valued at $5.03, and the Vietnamese Dong, another currency often overlooked by mainstream investors, was suddenly listed at $3.95. At first, many thought it was a glitch, a trick of the system, a momentary error in the vast machinery of banking institutions. But as more screenshots emerged, shared by people who had no connection to each other, the whispers turned into murmurs, and the murmurs into a wave of excitement that spread across continents. People who had held onto their dinar and dong for years, some even decades, felt a jolt of hope they had long buried under the skepticism of others. Families that had quietly bought and stored these currencies, sometimes in small amounts that seemed insignificant at the time, now imagined scenarios that were previously only the stuff of dreams. Paying off debts, buying homes, traveling the world, and funding long-desired businesses, all of it suddenly felt tangible. In online chat rooms, voices trembled with disbelief, some typing in all caps as though shouting would make the numbers more real. "Is this actually happening?" one person wrote, followed by a flurry of replies from strangers who suddenly felt like comrades in a shared secret. Others were more cautious, typing carefully, reminding the group that leaks could be false, that banks had been known to post errors, and that patience was always necessary in the world of currencies. Yet, even the skeptics couldn't deny the thrill, the adrenaline that ran through their veins as they stared at the numbers that promised unimaginable gains. News of the leaked rates spread beyond small forums and private groups. Social media platforms, usually dominated by entertainment and mundane updates, were suddenly flooded with posts about the dinar and dong. Videos appeared showing people logging into their online banking accounts, hands shaking, hearts racing, faces lit by the glow of their screens as they confirmed the numbers for themselves. Comments poured in from people in countries around the world, sharing screenshots, expressing disbelief, and asking each other if they were seeing the same thing. It was as if the entire globe had collectively leaned forward, ears straining for the sound of confirmation, eyes fixed on the figures that held the promise of life, changing wealth. Even financial analysts and experts who usually maintained a stoic, measured presence were caught off guard. Many took to live streams, talking through the potential implications, discussing historical precedents, and debating the likelihood of these rates being legitimate. Some warned viewers to be cautious, reminding them that sudden spikes in currency value often led to corrections, while others speculated that the leak could be a precursor to an official revaluation that would shock the markets. Yet the sheer excitement of the possibility seemed to override caution for the majority of people. The energy was contagious, spreading from online platforms to offices, homes, and cafes, wherever people had access to the internet and a screen to check their accounts. In ordinary households, the reactions were intensely personal and emotional. Parents whispered to each other about how the sudden rise could change their family's future. Young adults sat with friends, calculating in hushed tones what their life would look like if the numbers were real. Every calculation was accompanied by laughter, gasps, and occasional tears of joy, as the impossible seemed within reach. Some people scrolled through years of banking statements, trying to estimate just how much they could gain from the currencies they had held on to for so long. Others began imagining the ripple effect, the new opportunities, the freedom from long-standing financial pressures, the ability to pursue dreams they had set aside due to limitations that suddenly no longer seemed insurmountable. Amidst the excitement, there was also a sense of urgency. People were logging in repeatedly, refreshing pages as if sheer willpower could make the numbers more real. Messages poured into friends, family members, and online communities. Check your account now. Is this showing for anyone else? We need confirmation. The world had become a hive of anticipation, and every second that passed felt like an eternity. Some joked nervously about calling their banks. Others debated whether physical branches would honor these rates if the leak proved accurate. Even the most skeptical found themselves swept along by the collective energy, unable to resist imagining a future shaped by a currency surge that could redefine everything they thought they knew about finance and wealth. By midday, the story had taken on a life of its own. Influencers and financial news outlets were picking up on the chatter, creating videos, posts, and live discussions about the leaked rates. Analysts dissected every screenshot, cross-checking data, and speculating on the possible triggers. Yet through all the analysis, the human story remained front and center. Ordinary people were holding onto a dream, seeing in real time the manifestation of years of hope, strategy, and patience. It was a global moment of shared anticipation, a collective holding of breath as people across different countries, cultures, and backgrounds stared at the same numbers, feeling the same surge of possibility. Even as questions arose about the authenticity of the leaks, the excitement refused to subside. People were planning, imagining, and dreaming. They talked about what they would do if the rates held, creating mental maps of financial freedom and personal transformation. Families, friends, and online communities bonded over shared speculation, sharing advice, warnings, and encouragement. The Dinar and Dong had suddenly become symbols of potential, carriers of opportunity that had seemed unattainable just hours before. And in that moment, as screens glowed and hearts raced, one truth became undeniable. Something extraordinary was happening, and those who had dared to hope were now on the edge of a story that could change their lives forever. The excitement from the leaked rates didn't just stay online. It spilled into living rooms, kitchens, and office spaces around the world. People were no longer just reading messages or watching screenshots. They were living them. Families gathered around laptops and tablets, phones clutched tightly in hands that trembled with anticipation. Parents whispered calculations to each other, trying to see how this sudden surge in the Dinar and Dong could change their entire financial trajectory. Some had been quietly holding these currencies for years, even decades, often buying small amounts here and there, under the radar, hoping that one day the patient strategy would pay off. That day had arrived, or at least it seemed to have. Friends called each other in excitement, often unable to contain their disbelief. "You're seeing this, right?" one voice asked. "I just checked my account and it says $5.03 for the dinar." There was a pause, filled with static from overloaded phone lines and the occasional background noise of other family members celebrating. "No way, this can't be real," the other voice said, but even as they spoke, their tone betrayed hope. Conversations in offices shifted dramatically. Financial news normally discussed in dry terms now had a pulse, an urgency that made every cubicle feel alive with energy. Coworkers huddled over screens, whispering calculations, imagining what they could do with the potential windfall. Dreams that had been shelved for years, starting businesses, paying off student loans, traveling the world, suddenly felt tangible, almost within reach. In cafes and public spaces, people stared at their devices as if by sheer concentration they could make the numbers more permanent, more real. Some were laughing nervously, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The internet had become a living organism buzzing with activity and speculation. Social media platforms exploded with posts, memes, and videos, all centered on the astonishing numbers. Videos of people checking their accounts went viral within hours, racking up millions of views from viewers who weren't even holding these currencies but couldn't help being caught up in excitement. Comment sections were alive with predictions, calculations, and emotional responses ranging from ecstatic to cautious. Some users tried to bring rationality to the chaos, warning that leaks were often mistakes or temporary glitches. Yet for most, caution was secondary to the rush of possibility, the thought that their years of patience and strategy might finally pay off. Financial experts began appearing in live streams and news segments, trying to analyze the situation. They spoke in measured tones, explaining how currency fluctuations normally worked, warning viewers to remain calm, and discussing the historical likelihood of such drastic changes. But even the analysts themselves seemed unable to completely dampen the excitement. The sheer volume of activity online, the thousands of screenshots being shared, and the energy of ordinary investors celebrating potential life-changing numbers created a momentum that was hard to resist. People were imagining the ripple effects, how local economies might react, how global currency markets could shift, and what it would mean for ordinary citizens who had quietly held these assets. Amid the excitement, there was also a deep emotional undercurrent. For some, this was about more than money. It was validation. Years of quietly investing, of believing in something that others dismissed as foolish, were suddenly vindicated. Families whispered dreams of paying off mortgages and loans, finally freeing themselves from long-standing financial pressures. Young adults imagined trips around the world, starting businesses they had only talked about, or finally moving out of cramped apartments into homes they had longed for. Conversations turned almost spiritual, as people grappled with the realization that patience, diligence, and faith in the process could yield unimaginable results. The frenzy also sparked a sense of urgency and competitiveness. People logged in repeatedly, refreshing pages and triple-checking screenshots as if they could will the numbers to remain. Online forums became crowded with advice on how to secure these rates, discussions about potential banking errors, and predictions on how long the rates might last. The digital chatter mirrored the emotional roller coaster of the participants. Hope intertwined with fear, excitement with anxiety, dreams mixed with practical calculations. Even those who were generally skeptical found themselves drawn into the energy, refreshing accounts, calculating potential gains, and imagining scenarios where they suddenly held wealth far beyond what they had ever thought possible. Some individuals went further, imagining not only personal gain but generational change. Parents and grandparents discussed what this could mean for their children and grandchildren. Conversations included paying off long-term debts, funding education, or creating small family-run businesses that could finally take off. The potential impact was almost overwhelming. The numbers weren't just financial, they represented opportunity, freedom, and a reshaping of possibilities that had been limited for years. The excitement was not just about immediate gain, but about a future that suddenly seemed accessible. The atmosphere was not without tension, however. With excitement came anxiety, and with potential windfalls came the fear of disappointment. People debated whether the banks would honor these rates if the leak proved accurate. Would there be limits? Glitches, government intervention, these questions did little to slow the rising tide of energy. The emotional intensity of the moment, fueled by social media and viral posts, had become almost palpable. Online communities became arenas of speculation, celebration, and strategy. They shared tips, warnings, and encouragement, creating a sense of unity among strangers who were now emotionally invested in the same financial event. By late afternoon, the story had reached every corner of the globe. News outlets picked up on the buzz, some reporting cautiously, others sensationalizing the numbers to attract viewers. Analysts tried to provide context, but the collective imagination of millions of ordinary people had already transformed the story into something much bigger than mere numbers. People were no longer just observing. They were participating in a shared experience, a living narrative of possibility, risk, and hope. Families, friends, and communities were drawn together, talking late into the night, planning, dreaming, and imagining a reality shaped by a currency surge that had seemed impossible just hours before. And through it all, one thought remained constant. If even half of what was being reported was true, the world of finance and the lives of those holding these currencies would be forever altered. The energy, the anticipation, and the dreams of millions converged into a single, electric pulse, a moment in time that people would remember long after the numbers were verified or corrected. It was a global phenomenon, not just about currency, but about hope, possibility, and the tantalizing idea that patience, faith, and careful planning could finally be rewarded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. As the hours passed, the frenzy surrounding the leaked rates didn't just persist, it intensified. The initial shock and disbelief had transformed into a kind of feverish anticipation, a collective holding of breath that spanned continents and time zones. Social media platforms were flooded with reactions, videos of people checking their accounts, clips of families hugging in disbelief, screenshots shared and reshared, and comment sections overflowing with calculations, speculations, and dreams. It wasn't just news anymore. It had become an event, a shared experience, a global phenomenon that felt almost tangible. Even people who had never invested in dinar or dong were drawn in, captivated by the idea that ordinary currencies could suddenly become life-changing wealth. The energy was electric, infectious, almost palpable, as if the world had collectively leaned closer to the screen, waiting for confirmation that the numbers were real. In homes around the world, the reactions were deeply personal and emotional. People whispered to loved ones, their voices trembling with excitement and disbelief. Parents imagined paying off long-standing debts, finally achieving the financial freedom they had worked decades for. Young adults mapped out possibilities they had only dreamed of, traveling to far-off countries, starting businesses, buying homes, or pursuing education they had put on hold. The numbers weren't just about money, they represented opportunity, transformation, and a break from financial limitations that had constrained their lives for years. Every calculation sparked new dreams, every screenshot confirmed potential, and every shared story amplified the collective imagination. Even those who had been skeptical at first found themselves captivated, checking accounts repeatedly, calculating possible gains, and imagining scenarios where their lives were suddenly unrecognizable from what they had known. The excitement spilled into public spaces as well. Cafes, restaurants, and parks became unofficial gathering spots for people glued to their devices. Strangers shared screens, compared rates, and whispered strategies, as if participating in a secret global club. Laughter, gasps, and exclamations punctuated the air, blending into a symphony of collective astonishment. The energy was contagious. Even bystanders who had no direct stake in the currencies found themselves drawn into the frenzy. The story had transcended financial speculation. It had become a human phenomenon, a moment of shared hope and wonder that united people from different cultures, backgrounds, and countries in a common narrative of possibility. Online forums and chat rooms became arenas of intense activity. People debated what the leaked rates meant, how long they might last, and what steps should be taken to maximize potential gains. Some offered cautious advice, warning that leaks could be errors or temporary glitches, while others speculated that a formal revaluation was imminent. Strategies were shared, calculations posted, and predictions made with feverish energy. Even in these spaces, where rationality often dominates, the excitement of possibility overtook logic. People were imagining futures that had seemed unattainable just hours before, dreaming in vivid detail about how sudden wealth could transform their lives, families, and communities. The emotional intensity of the moment was staggering. For many, this wasn't just about numbers. It was about validation and reward. Years of quietly investing, holding on to currencies dismissed by skeptics, and waiting patiently were suddenly paying off. The excitement was intertwined with relief, joy, and even a kind of awe. Conversations in homes and offices often turned into planning sessions, imagining how to use potential gains, discussing new opportunities, and dreaming of a life freed from financial stress. In some cases, entire families were swept into collective decision-making, evaluating what dreams could finally become realities if the leaked rates were accurate. The scale of possibility was breathtaking, touching everything from personal goals to generational change. As the story spread further, news outlets began covering the phenomenon with increasing intensity. Videos of people reacting, screenshots, and viral posts made headlines. Financial analysts provided commentary, trying to frame the situation within the context of global markets, currency regulations, and historical precedent. Yet, even as experts offered cautionary perspectives, the emotional current of excitement remained unstoppable. The human element had taken over the thrill of possibility, the shared experience, and the vision of sudden transformation, created a force that was impossible to ignore. Across countries, time zones, and cultures, people were connected through a single story, bound by the hope that something extraordinary was within reach. The anticipation created new dynamics online. Communities of investors, long accustomed to slow, moving currency speculation, became vibrant hubs of interaction. Advice, encouragement, warnings, and shared calculations dominated discussions. The collaborative energy was remarkable. Strangers became collaborators, united by the belief that a rare opportunity was unfolding. People were not just observing, they were participants, emotionally invested in a shared journey of potential prosperity. Every post, comment, and screenshot contributed to a collective narrative, a living story that was evolving in real time. Despite the excitement, there was also an undercurrent of tension. People worried about the authenticity of the leak, the possibility of banking errors, and the potential for intervention by authorities. Some questioned whether the rates would hold, whether limits would be imposed, or whether unexpected complications could arise. These concerns, however, did little to dampen the enthusiasm. The human desire to imagine and anticipate outweighed caution, and the shared energy of millions of people sustained a fevered optimism that transcended rational analysis. By evening, the story had reached a global crescendo. Social media trends reflected the intense activity, with hashtags, posts, and viral videos dominating timelines. News channels covered the phenomenon, broadcasting images of people celebrating, calculations being made, and communities responding to the potential windfall. Ordinary people, who had quietly invested and waited for years, were now at the center of a global conversation. They were witnesses to, and participants in a rare and extraordinary moment, a time when patience, diligence, and hope converged into a possibility that could reshape their lives. In the midst of this, one thought lingered in everyone's mind. If even a fraction of the leaked rates were accurate, the world would never look the same again. Ordinary currencies had suddenly become vehicles of immense potential, and ordinary people had the chance to transform their futures. Dreams that had been deferred, postponed, or abandoned were now alive, shimmering in the glow of a computer screen or the light of a phone. The emotional intensity, the shared anticipation, and the collective hope created a moment of unity and exhilaration that transcended geography, culture, and circumstance. And so, the day ended not with resolution but with possibility. People went to bed with hearts racing, minds buzzing with calculations and dreams, and a sense of anticipation that could not be contained. The leaked rates had not just created a financial stir. They had sparked a human phenomenon, a story of hope, imagination, and the tantalizing idea that ordinary lives could suddenly be touched by extraordinary opportunity. As screens dimmed and notifications slowed, the underlying energy persisted, a quiet hum of excitement and expectation, waiting for the next chapter in a story that was still unfolding.